Dystopia warning, obviously. Now, I've been recovering from SARS for the last couple of days. Yeah, I can't hear in that ear. All I can hear is and I currently feel like my head is immersed underwater, which is nice. It's probably what some of my harshest critics would like to happen. You know, a la witch trials. So naturally, I thought I'd ease myself back in with my most requested topic, which is the suspension of the 7 Labour rebels. As some of you will be aware, the other day, 7 Labour MPs had their whip removed for voting with the SNP on an amendment to the King's Speech related to the 2-child cap. I think some of the people quite aggressively asking for my opinion on this is because they've seen what I've had to say about it on the hate platform owned by the space incel, known as Twitter. I'm not calling it X, it's mental. They want to have an excuse to just shout, centrist and other insults at me, despite it not being even remotely rooted in reality. I suppose my view on them is quite controversial, but it's not for the reasons that many people assume it is. I don't defend Labour on the 2-child cap, not in the slightest. I think it should have been a priority in the King's Speech, and it should have been in the manifesto to drop that Tory policy. However, one thing has to be very clearly noted, which is that every single one of those MPs stood on a manifesto and was sworn into Parliament knowing very well that it wasn't in the manifesto and it wasn't in the King's Speech. In fact, they fought and won campaigns despite that. I personally think that instead of giving money to the royal family, who I can't believe even fucking accept the money, considering the cost of living crisis that we're in, it's probably one of the areas that you could cut corners to feed starving kids. Or, tax corporations that are avoiding billions. Or tax the super rich until they squeak. Anyway, despite all that, Labour made it very clear they're not going to be keeping it permanently. They're not running around going, yay, wicked, kids in poverty, brilliant. In fact, what Rachel Reeves is doing is a full financial review. Although, frankly, I don't think we need that to know that the Tories have screwed the economy beyond recognition and destroyed the country. Rachel Reeves is just going to get back a spreadsheet that just says the word fuck on it repeatedly, highlighted in bold. The autumn budget isn't far away, and they're broadly expected to drop the cap in that budget. And they're also implementing a child poverty task force, many social mobility provisions, mental health measures for children, etc. Anyway, back to the rebels. And the reason I just outlined all of that is to add an element of balance to this, because my opinion on the rebels is not based on or born from any form of dislike for any of them. In fact, there's a number of them that I actually quite admire the political philosophy of, but I think the actions that they've taken are stupid, because I think that every single one of them is better than wasting their ability doing something so unbelievably counterproductive. For what? To prove a point that we already know. To rebel against something that everybody already knows about and knew about prior to the election. Nobody morally astute thinks that the 2-cap policy is a good thing. There's a reason why it's unheard of for a member of a new government to vote with or for an amendment to their own King's Speech. And any other party leader would have probably had no choice but to suspend the whip. And they'd have probably gone a lot further than to suspend it temporarily. It was never going to succeed. They knew it, and they knew the consequences of doing it before they did it. This wasn't about being purged, this was about cause and effect. At that point, Labour had been in power for 18 days. Now, this wasn't just a display of disloyalty to their own leadership, but I think a display of loyalty to the former leader of the opposition. Every single one of those were Corbynites or are Corbynites. And what's the outcome? Starmer looks like a callous Tory and they all look like principled politicians. I'm not saying that it wasn't about the principle for them, but it's a hell of a coincidence that every single one of them has close links to Jeremy Corbyn. Now, when I even slightly suggested on the aforementioned hate app the other day that Corbyn had any, link to this whatsoever, people were outraged. They lose their minds the moment you even slightly critique him. And that's a surefire way to know that they've made the heinous error of making a political figure their personal idol. Nobody is beyond reproach, least of all bloody politicians. But it's personal to them. You know, it's like calling their mum a slut. They make strategic decisions. They have loyalties. That's how politics works, isn't it? Okay, so it was about principle, all right? What have they gained from this? What have they gained by willfully rescinding their power, taking away their ability to provide hands-on input to policy that could help children, and relegating themselves to sniping from the sidelines as if they're still in opposition? Now they'll have no collaborative, input, no influence, no contribution. Their specific left-wing influence will not have any part in this now. No, they're back to protesting in Jeremy Corbyn's after-school philosophy club. It's counterproductive at best. It's moronic at worst. It's like cutting off your dick to spite your dick. Now, in a move that I found so incredibly surprising, Jeremy Corbyn wrote to all 7 members, inviting them to join him in an informal alliance of independence. He said, and I quote, "As the 2 main parties fail to defend the bold choices this country needs," they'd been in power 18 days at that point, "we will be there to offer a real alternative." How? With no power. "And to defend a society that cares for each other and cares for all." Yeah, that's what we all want, mate. Do you know how many times Jeremy Corbyn rebelled against the last Labour government? 428 times. He's basically been paid by us, the taxpayer, all of his life to protest. I don't have anything personally against him. I don't have anything personally against the 7 Labour rebels that had the whip taken from them. I just don't think it's particularly helpful. And I think it's a lot easier to request things from a place of hypothesis and protest than it is objective reality. You see, he's not in a position, and he's never likely to be in a position, where he actually has to make the really difficult decisions, is he? He's not been assigned a budget that's made of dust and feathers like the new Labour government. He hasn't got a black hole to mitigate. It's just philosophy from the fringes. And now those 7 MPs who had been elected to government, the first Labour government in 14 years, and they've given it all up to sit and shout from the sidelines when they are capable, and I do believe principled politicians. There's no excuse for it. And for what? Loyalty to that man? What are they actually going to achieve? They will have no influence on the government whatsoever. You see, I don't believe in lauding any politician whatsoever. Even the politicians I most admire, I accept the faults of. And just because you don't kneel at the altar of Jeremy Corbyn, it doesn't mean that you're a centrist, doesn't mean you're not a socialist, doesn't mean that you agree with the horrific 2-child cap. I certainly do not. It's a horrific Tory policy designed to demonise the most vulnerable, who have already had their welfare cut beyond recognition to the point where they can't survive and they're starving. And I also will not defend the new Labour government no matter what they do. I certainly do not defend them on this. But I also will not defend idiotic decisions that are made in protest.